Guys, a few days ago, all of the info about Columbina got released, and she's shaping up to be the typical meta-changing character who delivers timely releases during this period of the patch cycle. In this video, I will tell you how you should build her in terms of artifacts and weapons, but also taking a look at some of her teams, because since she's more of a support, what she wants depends on what the team wants. Furthermore, I will analyze some of her constellations to tell you how impactful they are and whether you should go for them or the signature weapon. One last thing before I start, Columbina isn't a full-fledged support. She also has main DPS potential, but for this video I will only focus on her sub-DPS builds because I don't want things to get too nebulous. Without further ado, let's go. First of all, in terms of leveling her, you'll have to farm the Hera's Ward boss, so the same that Nefer needs. Beyond that, funnily enough, she needs the Slime Remains, both for Ascension and talent leveling, which is pretty great because it's a very common material to have. For her talents specifically, she also needs the Philosophies of Moonlight, so the same as Llama. Unfortunately, both her weekly boss and local specialty materials will only be present in 6.3, and that's a shame because that will time-gate her leveling process a lot, especially the weekly boss part. Talking about her stats now, Columbina is a HP scaling character that deals a lot of lunar damage on her teams. This is par to course for non-cry characters, as all of them have various traditional attacks, but for the most part they rely on direct lunar attacks to deal damage. Basically, Columbina's raw hydro damage output is not that great in comparison. All of her direct lunar attacks scale off HP, so building that stat is obvious, but it's worth noting that HP won't affect some parts of her damage, like normal lunar electrocharge triggers, and also part of her lunar bloom damage if Llama is on her team, as Llama buffs those attacks with quills that ignore the benefiting character's main stat. For this reason, Crit is really the most versatile stat to build on her, as that will affect all of her damage equally. Kinda goes without saying that Crit is good, but I just wanted to point out this thing that can easily be overlooked. Something to note is that she gets a lot of crit rate for free, as she has a crit rate ascension stat and also a passive that can increase her crit rate up to 15%. For this reason, you should really build her crit stats with caution, especially if you plan to give her a crit rate weapon. Lastly, Elemental Mastery is pretty bad. Not only doesn't affect her normal hydro damage, which while not immense, it still matters in the big picture, but it's also not that impressive for her lunar damage, so definitely prioritize HP stats over that. And lastly, the energy requirements. I've heard a lot of drama about her being these impossibly bad characters to build in this regard, but truthfully, it's not that terrible. She's pretty similar to Furina in terms of particle generation, so her requirements should be the same as her in situation where she's used as the only hydro character on the team. The only problematic part is that the solo hydro scenario will be very typical for her, unlike Furina, who has several double hydro teams that make sense. Her requirements get alleviated a lot if she's used with a weapon that has energy-related utility, like Favonius Codex, Prototype Ember, or a signature weapon. I will talk about weapons more in depth later, but the situation overall is not horrible. The only real issue is that Columbina is a character that generates particles over time and not immediately, and so in content like Stygian, where she starts with 0 energy, she will struggle a lot bursting the first 1 or 2 rotations, and that's pretty bad. That's a shame. Honestly, I was quite surprised when I found out that she didn't have a special energy bar like Skirk and Mavuika. Now our best artifact sets, but before that, let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. And also go check Iniba in description if you want to get Primo Gems at a discounted price. So, regarding the sets, she has a best in slot option for damage, which is the Moon set, so the upcoming artifact set of 6.3. It provides Elemental Mastery as well as a Lunar Reaction bonus that stacks up to 60% if there are 2 non-cry characters on the team, so her ideal team situation. While this is great and all, it's not impressively strong by any means. The main reason is that in pretty much every situation I looked at, Columbina is just better off running a supportive set that helps the team instead. For example, if you're planning to run a Nefer, Llama, Columbina, Cookie team and want to give Columbina the Lunar set, Cookie the Deepwood set, and Llama the Silken set, so the non-cry supportive set, the results would be worse than if you were to give Deepwood to Columbina and give the Instructor set to Cookie, because the additional Elemental Mastery is really important for Nefer. On the same composition but with Nahida instead of Cookie, you're better off giving Columbina the Silken set and give Llama double elemental mastery combination, since Llama buffs more the higher her elemental mastery is. On a Flames Ineffa Sucrose team, Ineffa is a better damage dealer than Columbina by a noticeable amount, so if you only have one good moonset, it's better to give it to her and give Columbina Silken. But regardless, it's never worth to use it on Columbina, even if you have a second good one, if compared to supportive sets like the already mentioned Silken or even Tenacity of the Millelith. The situation changes a little bit if you plan to invest hard on her and get several of her constellations and maybe her signature weapon. In that case, her damage really skyrockets, and so it makes more sense to give her a more damage-oriented set like the Moon. Even then, there isn't a significant difference in terms of team output, however. Basically, it boils down to this: if your Columbina is not whaled, then you should give her a supportive set that fits the team she's being used in. Alternatively, you can give her the Moon set, as that will benefit her damage nicely, although if your main DPS is equally highly invested, then supportive sets can become better again on her. Moving on to her best weapons now, as I said before, she has several options that can help her alleviate the energy requirements. Her signature weapon does that and more, as it will regenerate 12 energy for every rotation, while also increasing her HP, and more importantly increasing her crit damage a lot, specifically by around 150% for the lunar attacks, which is just tremendous. The free-to-play version of this would be the humble Prototype Amber, which actually refunds more energy for every rotation, but obviously can really compete in terms of offensive buffs. Overall, she doesn't really have many other good options. Favonius is competitive with Prototype Amber, Sacrificial Jade is a decent offensive option, but really problematic to build because of how much crit rate Columbina already gets, and the energy requirements get quite high. 5-star options are honestly not that good, they're mostly stat sticks, and only the ones that give HP and crit are relevant. Personally, I would either suggest to go for the signature weapon or stick to Prototype Amber and Favonius, as the other offensive options aren't really worth the hassle. Something to note is that while her signature weapon is insane, this doesn't matter too much by itself when she's used as a sub DPS, because she only makes up for around 20% of the team damage in that scenario. It's still nice to have, but by itself it's not particularly crazy. However, things can change if you take into account her constellations, which increase her damage output by a lot. Her C1 basically makes her trigger an extra lunar attack the moment she uses her skill, which is very strong, and also provides various supportive effects depending on the team's dominant lunar reaction type. If it's lunar charge, it will give the active character an energy refund of 6 when her lunar attack triggers with a cooldown of 15 seconds. Sometimes she will be the one to receive this energy, so it's pretty nice for her. For Lunar Bloom, it provides the active character full interruption resistance, which is pretty whatever for somebody like Nefer, who has plenty already, and seems more intended for Columbina main DPS, since she will primarily be dealing Lunar Bloom damage in that situation. Lastly, for Lunar Crystallites, she provides a shield every time she triggers a lunar attack, which scales off her HP. The shield is not very durable, but since it refreshes every 6 seconds, it becomes quite nice to have and makes her a great sustain option. On top of that, it straight up increases the team's lunar reaction damage by 3%, which is just a cherry on top kinda thing. In terms of damage increase for her, the signature weapon is considerably stronger if you're upgrading from Prototype Amber, so if that's what you care about, then the signature weapon is better. The lunar damage increase team-wide the constellation provides is honestly not that impactful, and really the only great supportive effect it provides is the shield for Lunar Crystallites, if it allows you to replace the eventual dedicated defensive slot on the team for a more offensive character, which is likely in G-Buy teams. The C2, however, is a whole other beast. Just like the C1, it gives her extra lunar attacks by basically increasing the elemental skill lunar hit frequency, and on top of that it provides meaningful supportive effects for the active character, which again vary depending on the dominant elemental reaction on the team. The damage increase for Columbina here is just massive, higher than both the C1 and the signature weapon, and at this point she very easily starts dealing sub DPS output which surpasses 1 million, something very uncommon for the role, even at this investment level. For the supportive side of it, it's nice and definitely more meaningful than the Constellation one. While it won't be the reason you get this Constellation, as Columbina's own damage increase is much more impressive, it's nice to have that on top of this. Overall, what I will do here is prioritize the Constellations over the signature weapon, because while the Constellation one is weaker than the signature weapon for the most part, it brings you closer to getting the Constellation 2, obviously. But to be honest, if you only have to pick between the C1 and the signature weapon, maybe you should skip both, because I think, for example, getting the signature weapon is only really worth if you ever C2, because at C2 she starts dealing damage over 1 million very easily, and so better than most sub DPS at that investment, as I said before, and kind of similar as a main DPS, assuming that the main DPS is a Constellation 0, however, and so if you have that level of damage and then you get the signature weapon on top of that, so a damage increase of around 35% to 40%, then that's really massive. But if you get that while she's a Constellation 0 and she's dealing like 500 damage per rotation on average, then it's not that huge. Basically, I wouldn't get the signature weapon by itself, but if you get the Constellation 2, then in my opinion the signature weapon becomes quite worth it. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, also go check the overall analysis I made on Columbina the last video, and go check Iniva in the description below to get discounted Primo Gems. Bye bye.